Hello everyone, my name is Jesse Patterson and I will be teaching this online philosophy course. Here are a series of statements and questions to get you thinking about philosophy. Please take a few minutes and think about the following statements. How much do you agree or disagree with each one? It is important to think critically. There is a real difference between right and wrong. There is order in the universe. Truth exists independent of our minds. Some issues are so far-reaching that they require government oversight. It is important to be concerned about the well-being of loved ones. It is important to be concerned for the well-being of strangers. It is important to remember the phrase survival of the fittest. It is important to respect others. Is there an issue people should be more concerned about? What are your favorite movies, TV shows, and books? You can tell from the previous slide, philosophy is a discipline that encourages a lot of thought. The interesting thing about philosophy is that it is based on thinking things through on your own. Philosophy tells us that each one of us has something to contribute to the overall understanding of society. We each have our own sense of what's right and wrong, and we should feel empowered to share our ideas with others. First few statements from the survey bring us back to the beginnings of Western philosophy with the ancient Greeks. People like Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates spent a lot of time trying to figure out the answers to these sorts of big questions. They started off with the idea that it is important to think critically. We should not just accept the things we are told. We should question authority. From this perspective, the Greeks developed the idea that there is a real difference between right and wrong. According to this idea, it is possible for someone to think they are doing the right things in life, but in reality, they may be wrong about it. The Greeks also believe that we live in an ordered universe. If we do our best to understand the world around us, we will see evidence of truth that exists beyond our individual perspectives. This idea that truth exists independent of our minds is a cornerstone of classical Western philosophy and one that has caused considerable debate ever since. Nowadays, we live in a world that has been greatly shaped by modern science. People like Isaac Newton here base their understanding of the world on evidence and experience. Without the scientific mindset, we wouldn't have cured so many diseases, nor would we have the benefits of the computer and the internet age. But can science answer all of our questions? Science cannot tell us whether or not our lives have meaning. Science cannot tell us whether or not we are doing the right things with our lives. For these sorts of questions, we turn to philosophy. Here is a timeline from the ancient world to the present, showing many important individuals that have shaped our understanding of the world. There are some religious figures and scientific figures on the screen to give you a sense of context. The names in bold and underlined are the ones we will be studying in this course. My goal is to introduce you to some of the most important philosophers in history. We're going to start our course with two classic figures from Asian philosophy, Lao Tzu and Buddha. We will then study the ancient Greeks, Plato and Aristotle. The ancient Greek philosophers, depicted here in Raphael's Renaissance painting, The School at Athens, gave us what we now call Western philosophy. They believed that one must guide one's life using principles and reason. The individual, as well as society and government, should not be ruled by faith, superstition, or deference to authority. For the Greeks, reason and logic should be our guides. From the political philosophy of the ancient Greeks, we will later discuss some contemporary issues in political thinking. Nowadays, there is considerable debate over how much we should be concerned with the well-being of others. Should we care about unemployment and poverty, or is it everyone's job to fend for themselves, and those who are successful deserve it, while those who are not should have tried harder? This sort of social Darwinism represented by the phrase survival of the fittest, is a very interesting point to consider. Let me state at the outset, my goal is to get you to think about both sides of this debate. I am not here to indoctrinate you one way or the other. I want to get you to think about the reasoning on all sides and come to your own conclusion. I will be taking every argument as seriously as possible. No one will be graded poorly for having a viewpoint. You will only be graded based on how well you defend the arguments you set forth. In regards to political philosophy, we should remind ourselves what the judges here should have in the back of their minds. Their views should not be clouded by prejudices or preconceived notions. The idea of something being legal or illegal should be based on logic and reasoning. Why is the statue of justice blind? Because justice should be based on principles in the abstract. It is through philosophical thinking that such decisions should be made. These are the sorts of issues that make me want to study philosophy. I'm going to talk now for a little bit about the issues that continue to motivate me in this field. What causes a young person to go out into the street and riot? It is a sense that something is wrong with society. I'm very interested in trying to figure out what's right and wrong with the world and what would motivate people to stand up for what they believe in. It's like The Wolf of Wall Street represent an interesting take on this sort of discussion. If you haven't seen it already and aren't easily offended, I recommend checking it out. There is something quintessentially American about the pursuit of wealth, and in contrast to some of the philosophers we will be studying, I am not always convinced that this is such a bad thing. Here are some other films I like that present interesting points of philosophical debate. Also, if you haven't read it already, I recommend Brave New World as my favorite book. This novel depicts a future world in which people live in a class-based society, taking drugs and having casual sex. There is no deeper sense of meaning or purpose, and one of the main characters struggles with this truth. Published in 1932, it is eerily prophetic. Another compelling recent film is Children of Men. This film tackles the issues around protest movements as well as the war on terror. It is set in the not-too-distant future and offers an interesting way to think about life these days. Here is a screenshot from the very powerful film Zero Dark 30. As I am interested in the war on terror in all of its aspects, I found this film's depiction of the intelligence community and its interrogation tactics very compelling. Alright, so philosophy deals with heavy political and religious issues, but you can also find philosophy in works of art and music. When the Beatles went to India in 1968, it was to pursue a deeper understanding of the meaning of life. Philosophy is something we all need in our lives, and we can find different philosophical ideas in a lot of our cultural artifacts. Stand-up comedy also represents an interesting way of doing philosophy. Stand-up comedians can be some of the most honest figures in society. Just one person with a microphone can do a lot to open people's minds and get people to think differently. I recommend checking out any of these performers on YouTube. So here is our first official quote of the course. Philosophy is not a body of doctrine, but an activity. While I want you all to become familiar with the official figures in the history of philosophy, my primary goal is to get you to practice philosophy by doing it. The goal here is to get you to think critically and to be able to construct arguments to defend the views you hold. Alright, so for this first week, I want to introduce you to the fields of philosophy: metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics. These branches of philosophy are interrelated. One's ethics is largely a result about how one thinks about epistemology and metaphysics. So let's take a minute to get a handle on these ideas and we will then conclude this introductory presentation. First, we have metaphysics. This is the branch of philosophy that deals with that part of the world that is above physics. This includes the study of what exists above the physical realm. This can include God, souls, destiny, ideas, meaning, purpose, and numbers. Questions in the realm of metaphysics include, does life have a purpose? And is this all there is? So you have the physical realm with tables, chairs, computers, and people. The metaphysical world is said to exist independently of the physical realm. The idea here is that for every physical thing that exists in the world, there is a perfect idea of that thing that exists metaphysically. Let's consider a few examples. You can imagine in your minds the ideal dog, loyal, obedient, intelligent. But is every dog just like this ideal dog? What exists in the real world are different variations against this ideal. No dog is an exact replica of its ideal. Each dog is imperfect in some way. But each dog is a version of this possible ideal. Now, of course, you can divide dogs up into different breeds and point out how some dogs are better versions of their particular breed. But the idea remains. There is a separation between what exists in reality and what exists in its ideal state. Let's think about what human beings can create with our minds. Imagine a carpenter designing a chair. The chair, as it will exist, has to be thought about before it can come into being. The carpenter must have an idealized, metaphysical version of that chair in sight before setting to work. The realization of this idea in the physical world will again be at some variance to its ideal form. Here we see the carpenter decided to straighten the top of the chair rather than have the ornate curved style. You can find plenty of variations on the theme of expectation versus reality out there in the real world. But again, the point remains that the things we have in our mind are real, but not in a tangible, physical way. We can imagine how we would like things to be, and then compare the physical reality to the metaphysical one we had in mind. And this concept carries over into all aspects of our lives. We can think about what kind of life we would like to lead, and then do the necessary work to live up to that metaphysical ideal. Let's look at another example. Numbers. Where do numbers exist? They are theoretical entities. They don't physically exist anywhere in the world. You can have two chairs and you can write the number 2 on a piece of paper. But the actual existence of the number 2 is something that exists in theory or in the metaphysical realm. We can go further and talk about mathematics. Is the idea of addition reflective of a reality in the physical world? What is more real, the math of the real world or the math of the ideal world? For a philosopher like Plato, the world of metaphysics is more real than the world in front of us because ideas never die. The truth of 2 plus 2 equaling 4 has been around long before these chairs came into being, and this truth will be here long after these chairs are gone. Further, this truth is not something we created, rather it is something we realized to be true. Human beings did not invent math, it was discovered as an underlying aspect of reality. With Plato, the division between the physical world and the metaphysical world cuts through our own existence. This is the idea that each of us has both a body and a mind, and these are two separate existences. While your mind is a product of your physical body, does it really make sense to say that the mind is somewhere in the gray matter inside of your head? And just like we can talk about the ideal chair, we can also think about the ideal state of being or the ideal life. The point here is that if we think the right way about our lives, we can plan out how we want our life to look. By contrast, if we do not put in the effort, our lives will be the result of things that happen to us rather than what we decide to become. Philosophers want us to see the power of our minds to direct the course of our own existence. Finally, we can carry this line of thought through to the existence of God. Insofar as we consider ourselves the designer of our own life path, so too can we speak of God as the mind behind the design of existence itself. For everything that exists in the physical world and the metaphysical world, the claim is that God is that existence behind everything. The next up is the branch of epistemology. This field of philosophy asks, how do we know what we know? Take this child reaching up to the stove. How can the child know that the stove is hot? Well, there are at least two ways to learn this lesson: the easy way and the hard way. The easy way would be to listen to your parents when they tell you not to touch the hot stove. Or the child could think it through. Stoves are hot to cook food, so I shouldn't touch them unless I want to get burned. The other way to learn this lesson would be the hard way, through experience. Only by getting burned will the child learn that the stove is hot. The idea that we can know things through reason in advance of experience is called rationalism, while learning things by experience is called empiricism. More on this later. There is a third way people claim to attain knowledge, and that is through mysticism. Such knowledge is said not to come from reason or experience, but through faith. Many philosophers consider faith-based knowledge to not really be knowledge, and we will spend some time talking about why this may or may not be a good epistemology. Aesthetics is a branch of philosophy that we won't be studying directly in this course, but it's worth mentioning briefly at the outset. In this branch of philosophy, people construct arguments as to why something is a good piece of art or not. For example, Plato claims that art should elevate the soul above the body. If art serves only to stimulate bodily pleasure, then it is not really art, but vulgarity. Another aesthetic argument was set forth by Tolstoy, who said that art is a way to communicate sincere feelings. What makes something artistic is the fact that an artist was looking to communicate a genuine emotion to the audience. The discussion of aesthetics is a good frame of reference for thinking about philosophy. It is not enough to state one's conclusions. In order to have a philosophical discussion, you have to have reasons for your conclusions. You can't just say, I like it because it's good. This statement is not helpful. If you want other people to listen to you and agree with what you're saying, you have to give reasons for your conclusions. If you think a Rothko is a good piece of art, you'd have to explain why you think two fields of color conveys something meaningful or important. Only then, when giving reasons towards your conclusions, are you really engaging in philosophical discussion. Last up is ethics. This field of philosophy covers the questions over right and wrong. This speaks to individual ethics as well as social ethics. We can ask ourselves what it means to live a good life for ourselves. We can also talk about what it means to have a good society. Often these questions are interrelated. They are also connected to how one thinks about epistemology and metaphysics. Generally speaking, you can divide the philosophers we will be studying into realists and idealists. Some believe in metaphysics and all of the mystical stuff that comes with it. This shapes their worldview accordingly. This idealism is present most notably in people like Plato and Jesus. Other thinkers lean towards a more realistic or anti-metaphysical view of reality. We will see this in contrasting figures like Aristotle and Nietzsche. Kant represents an interesting middle ground between these philosophies. In the realm of political and ethical philosophy, this split is also evidenced by people like Marx and Mill, who argue for an idealistic vision of society, while philosophers like Ayn Rand argue for a less idealistic version of society. These philosophers present contrasting views of society and set forth the terms of a debate that continue to this day. Please take some time this week to post any questions or comments about any of these ideas to the course message board. Thank you for your attention and participation, and have a great week.